Now, a lot of this has to do with like the program that you're getting. Does it allow you to coach or facilitate? It's kind of a separate question or a separate video, but it does overlay on this. So again, it's not necessarily like should you or shouldn't you, or you should or you shouldn't. It depends. Okay, so I think it depends on where you're at with your business. Like if you know nothing about programming, I would probably outsource it. That being said, you need to learn how to program. If you're gonna run a CrossFit gym, you're gonna be the head coach, you need to fundamentally understand the program, what the pitfalls of that programming could be, what the pros and cons of the particular like actual WODs are when you're looking at that. All right, everybody, welcome back to Jerk Block Talk. I'm Jason Fernandez. We're here at CrossFit Rife. Today, I want to discuss something that is fairly prevalent in the CrossFit community, and I think primarily it is a good thing, but it does have its downsides. So I do want to talk a little bit today about outsourcing your programming. Now, full disclosure, I wrote our programming for a long time. We outsourced it for probably 2 years, and then recently we've taken it back in-house. What this video is not about, it is not about like the validity of the actual programming, meaning like the monostructural weightlifting and then gymnastics components of that, and then like what that looks like in execution as far as like the actual WOD that is programmed every day. This is more so from a gym owner aspect and from a coach's development standpoint. So we're not talking about programming. This is the act of outsourcing your programming and then the long tail associated with that, whether you do it or whether you don't do it. Now, first and foremost, I think whether you should outsource it or not depends. I think it depends on a lot of things within your business, where you're at as developmentally as a coach or as a business owner or as both. So I think there is a spot for doing it, and I think there is a spot for not doing it. I think it just depends. Now, I'm going to go over some pros and cons here in just a second, but I'll tell you kind of our journey first, just to give you some context. I wrote programming for about 6.5 years, a lot of programs. I largely was not spending time on the business, and there's very good argument for me spending time on the programming actually hurt the business. So that is a real thing, so I'm not going to discount that. However, there are some downsides to it as well. So we outsourced it. We went with warm up and workout. I personally know Pat Barber. I like his product. He's a traditional CrossFit programmer, and I liked the lesson planning that came along with it. We did that for about 2 years, and I learned a lot because I didn't touch it. Like I made a promise to myself I wasn't going to touch it, and I wasn't going to introduce my own bias to the programming. So we did that for about 2 years, and then recently we brought it back in-house, and now I pay one of my coaches to do the programming. So again, it depends, and we'll go through a couple different things there on why it depends on some things you should think about. Now, some of the pros on this, obviously it saves you time, right? Depending on how much time, what your developmental, or where you're at with regard to programming, if you're new, if you're a little bit more experienced at it, the time allocated to programming can compress or expand depending on that experience level. So, but either way, it will save you time. Okay, which is good depending on what your business needs. If your business needs you to be in the sales and creating systems, you arguably should get that 4 to potentially 10 hours back a month and put it to better use. You do have a dedicated service provider, so I pay somebody for that service, and it comes to me on time, so I know when it's coming. It's a very detailed product, and I just get to hand that out to my coaches. And in a lot of those, you're going to get coaching lesson plans, which is great. Depending on your coaches, if they're not familiar with lesson plans, this kind of gives them a cookie cutter sheet where they can just kind of go down that and kind of like read off of the script and facilitate the class. So in a lot of cases, if your coaches are not really experienced, they have a lesson plan to go by. This, however, can be a con as well, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then standardization. If you need that, if there's massive discrepancy across your coaching staff from one person to the next or from one class to the next, this will allow you to get some standardization across that coaching staff so that there's as little deviation of your product from class to class. So those are some of the pros, and those are not all of the pros. These are just some of the main ones that, from my experience of running a gym over the years, and a lot of what I see now, and a lot of this comes up in discussions at the level 1 and the level 2 course for CrossFit. Some of the cons, it's not unique to your gym, so you might have to do a bit more playing around with that and swapping things out with regard to programming. It's not unique to your space, depending on what that looks like and what they're going to program. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about if they program overhead walking lunges or something that requires a large square footage and people are going to be covering a lot of distance. Sled drag, stuff like that, depending if you don't have outside space for that, that can be problematic. It's not unique to your equipment. So if they're programming D-balls or sandbags or sled drags or any number of things that you don't have, assault bikes, ski ergs, all that stuff, if you don't have it, you're gonna have to change that, which could create some problems with, I don't wanna say redundancy, but a little bit of redundancy or too much of one particular type of movement, whether it's monostructural, weightlifting, or gymnastics. And then it's not, not necessarily unique to your demographic, depending on if you have an older population, if you have a little bit more of a competitive population, you might have to swap that programming out. Luckily, there's a lot of options out there with regard to programming. So you could probably find one that kind of fits your niche or your demographic. The other downside is programming can become a lost skill set if you're just outsourcing it, right? So I'm a firm believer of you should have a pretty firm grasp on programming in order to understand what you're getting. For instance, if I don't know anything about computers and I just walk into Best Buy and I'm like, hey, give me a computer, they're gonna give me whichever one they wanna sell me. Right. But if I know something about computers and I know what I'm looking for and I know what I need, depending on what type of business I'm running, what type of programming I want, what type of demographic I have, I'll be much better served and I'll know the product that I'm getting, and I'll also be able to critique the product that I'm getting, not just blindly follow it because somebody told me that it was good. And going back to like the coaching lesson plan, this can also hurt coaches' development. And you might be asking why. If all they do is ever read from a script and they don't understand or develop how to program or how to write their own lesson plans, that can be a really big problem down the road as far as that coach's development. They should be able to write their own lesson plan. They should be able to map out 60 minutes start to finish, regardless of what the workout is. And you want to get them to the point where they can walk in, they can take 5 minutes to look at the board and craft a lesson plan in their mind. The more detailed, the better, and you want them to practice. But what we push our coaches to get to is like they can walk in, look at that, and they can pretty much have a mapped lesson plan in their mind and be able to facilitate that without much prep on the front end. But we do want them to prep. It's just a skill set of getting able to do that. Now, a lot of this has to do with like the program that you're getting. Does it allow you to coach or facilitate? It's kind of a separate question or a separate video, but it does overlay on this. So again, it's not necessarily like should you or shouldn't you, or you should or you shouldn't. It depends. Okay, so I think it depends on where you're at with your business. Like if you know nothing about programming, I would probably outsource it. That being said, you need to learn how to program. If you're gonna run a CrossFit gym, you're gonna be the head coach, you need to fundamentally understand the program, what the pitfalls of that programming could be, what the pros and cons of the particular like actual WODs are when you're looking at that. The other thing to be careful of, and again, this is a separate video, but depending on the program, a lot of them are shifting to like strength plus Metcon. Again, I'm not here to tell you whether to do that or not. I have my own biases with that. But depending on the lesson plan for stuff like that, again, this can really hurt your coach's development, because if the lesson plan or the programming falls outside of your coach's or your coaching staff's skill set, that can be a really, really big problem. Meaning, if you're a pretty seasoned coach, facilitating a strength plus a Metcon can be very, very difficult to do. If you're just giving a new coach a ton of stuff to do in the hour, there's a really safe chance that there's not a ton of coaching going on and they're just facilitating the workout. Again, not good or bad. I mean, I would argue that it is bad, but again, I'm not here to tell you what to do, just things to think about when you're deciding whether to go down this road or not. Again, we've done it both ways, right? I've done it, we outsourced it, now it's back in house, I pay one of my coaches to do it. But again, something to think about. Again, I think everybody's all on board and like, hey, like you should outsource it. And I get that money is time, but again, I do think can be a short-term or a short-sighted conversation, because we really don't want to ignore that there is a long tail associated with outsourcing all the things that you do, because if that skill set or that expertise is lost within your facility, that can be a really, really big problem. Somebody in your facility should have that skill set and be able to do that. And if they don't, you should be developing that either through evaluating what you're paying for or just practicing and starting to do that. And whether you sprinkle that in over time, it's completely up to you. Again, this is not me saying like you should or you shouldn't, just some things to think about from somebody who's done a lot of programming, who's done it both ways, and who's had to switch to do it different ways, primarily based on what was going on with the business. So again, a lot of it has to do with like what's going on in your business, where is your time needed and where should it be allocated? And I could speak to both of those because I've done all of them, where it's like, hey, we need to grow the business, so my time shifted to basically being on the floor, sales, personal training, and all that stuff. But at the beginning, it was just kind of like, hey, we're gonna show up, we're gonna throw down, I'm gonna write these workouts, and I'm gonna learn as much as possible. So this is a really deep topic, and I don't want to make this too polarizing with regard to like the discussion, because it's not an either or. I think it's an and, depending on your scenario. If you're not sure whether you should do that, I think you should get with somebody, either a mentor or somebody, and ask them what they think the best way forward for you is. Again, there's a lot of value to outsourcing it, saving time, dedicated service provider, but at the same time, there's a really big problem with a gym owner or head coach who doesn't know anything about programming. That's just a major, major issue in my mind, particularly if we're going to be selling world-class coaching, and that's gonna be what you're projecting to the world. So that could put you in a bad spot, because you could be caught in a scenario where that's just not true, and we definitely don't wanna be liars. So do an honest evaluation on where you think you're at, what you think you can facilitate, what you think is actually happening within inside the walls of your gym, and how that's actually being executed on the floor when you do this. Again, I think it's an and, depending on where you're at. So if you guys have questions, I've been through multiple iterations of this. Go ahead and drop those in the comments. If you like this content, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.